Okay, here comes the fun part. I think I wish this could have been at the beginning without having to go through the other stuff. But this is the part where I anticipate a bunch of objections from people with IN proclivities who really doubt whether the FE test for INFJ, ruling it in, ruling it out as a possibility for one's own type. Those who doubt if this can be quite effective and quite easily. Um, so here's the thing. I ended the last section by talking about what sort of concerns and preoccupations are very characteristic of extroverted feeling when it appears in one of the top two positions in a cognitive function stack of a given personality type. The bottom line on that is if you have FE in prominence, then in your cognitive function stack, as INFJ does, then that means that it is very easy for you to have a drive towards promoting harmony in the present moment in social interactions, and that you are very attuned to what it takes to make things go smoothly in the social environment, and that you would very much like to do what you can actively to make the social environment that you're in right now much more harmonious and for things to run smoother and for people to be happy. This is what people with FE in prominence really want, and they naturally want it. There's no question about it. And again, INFJs, if there are any INFJs watching who really feel like they're very settled about their type, you definitely feel like you have a strong identification with INFJ. Please do comment on this. Tell me if I'm wrong. But from what I understand, that's the case. Now, there should be a distinction made between, again, behavior and cognitive function. Really what the true test is, or what it should be, is the cognition, what one wants to do, not the behavioralisms. However, it is more often the case that when we have a natural interest in something, when our mind is naturally drawn to pay attention to certain things, we tend to, what usually follows is some development of skill in pursuing that further, in exercise in terms of what we do in life. Now, of course, there are plenty of exceptions. Two huge exceptions I can think of right off the bat are if your circumstances, if your culture, if your family, if there are very, very powerful inducements to not exercise your dominant or auxiliary functions in your cognitive function stack, then, or if the material circumstances don't allow for you, for some reason, don't allow for you to really explore them, then that is definitely going to inhibit your skills development in the exercise of those functions in real life. Another case could be, too, that if there are severely mitigating circumstances, some mental illness, for example, or some neurological illness that might prevent exercise or inhibit or interfere with full development, maturation of skills associated with a given cognitive function, well, then, no, you're not going to see the behavioralisms to go with that. But I'm not talking about the exceptions here. I'm talking about the trends. I'm talking about the majority. And in most cases, by adulthood, middle adulthood, people have developed some skill with the areas associated with their dominant function, their auxiliary function, and even their tertiary and inferior functions if they've been putting effort into it, and they have a lot of conscious effort and practice going into that. Those are the people I'm talking about, okay? So here's the thing. If you are an INFJ, you are a more typical INFJ, then you are going to have a good deal of social skill, which is why INFJs are known to be are sometimes referred to as the most extroverted of the introverts, of the 8 introverted types, because they have Fe way up there in the auxiliary. And so they have this drive to contribute to social harmony actively, not to just want it, but to do something about it. So they are quite usually are exceptionally gracious people. And they're introverts who have the introvert preference for regenerating their own energy. That's something that they need, is a good deal of solitude. However, they tend to have the chops to give as good as the extroverts in the extroverted objective world, in the social world. They can appear very extroverted, very outgoing. And again, not to say that, all kinds of members of other introverted types can't as well, but INFJs are known for this. So, so I'm just going to sort of eliminate, let people go, give you what you need to let it go earlier if you want to. So here's the thing. If you don't identify with the concerns and preoccupations, you don't strongly and naturally and easily identify, and have pretty much always have in living memory with the preoccupations and priorities of extroverted feeling. And if you also, as an adult, have not found yourself to deploy certain skills having to do with exercise of that cognitive function, and that would be, so if you're not rather suave, if you're not, if you don't find it easy to make small talk that is polite and charming and that draws other people out and puts them at ease and makes them feel comfortable and unthreatened, and if you're not just a very, by most accounts, a very pleasant person to be around most of the time. That, when you are yourself, when you are not all stressed out or undergoing some unusual circumstance in life. If you cannot easily if you're not sitting there going, yeah, that's me. If you're not nodding your head vigorously, oh, I can totally relate to that. You're not an INFJ. Chances are, unless you're some very, very unusual exception within that camp. Here are some statements from some of my INFJ commentators on these videos, just to give you an idea of some very INFJ typical sentiments and attitudes. Here they are. One, okay, this is from a recent commentator. This is one who has tested as INFJ on multiple occasions, but is also tested as other things, and who still is just about what type he is. He said, I show people what they want to see and what will make them like me and keep things balanced and in harmony. This is an actual quote. Now, he wasn't trying to exemplify Fe here. This was in the middle of a discussion about something else. This was someone who was saying under one of my videos, I don't know why planfulness and organization and tidiness are so associated with INFJ, this type that I probably am, but I'm not sure. Because, that's not what I see. But then he proceeded to outline all the ways in which, they are talking about organization and not so much planfulness, but organization and being tidy and on top of things and together, right? And I thought this was really, anyway, so this person was arguing with me that because he was like, yeah, yes, those things are all, these are behaviors that I am doing, and that INFJs I know are doing, but it's not true that we're tidy and organized. He's just said, yes, we're behaving as if we're tidy and organized and we're doing all that, but no, we're not. And because we only show you, maybe it's the case that you think that that's true and you associate that with our type because those INFJs are showing you what you want to see, and that we really aren't. Okay, so this, by the way, a side note, this is also where I call bullshit on the purist stance on don't ever look at whole type, don't ever look at the whole type descriptions, don't ever look at that, don't ever look at behavioralisms, ever, just look at the pure abstraction of the cognitive functions. I'm calling bullshit, because this is exactly the kind of absurdity that can come out of that from really, really smart people, who are really putting an enormous amount of thought into this. And again, when you can come up with something like that, like, yes, I'm doing this thing that you say I'm doing, but no, I'm not doing this thing you say I'm doing, because you don't understand the motivation behind this thing that I'm doing. That's insane. Okay. It's crazy. So, or also if you find people who have been studying this, who are some of the most knowledgeable people around about what the cognitive functions are, they really know their stuff, and yet they can, ages into identifying with one type, suddenly be like, oh, you know what? I'm this other type that has half the cognitive functions, or even fewer, than the last one I really identified with. Now I'm totally this. What that says to me is that looking only at the cognitive functions, only ever, in those cases, it's not working. It's not working. And I'm just saying, why don't you, why not look at something else? All right, anyway. So back to things that people who have FE in prominence would likely identify with. Another INFJ, someone who feels herself strongly to be one, says, it feels we can be different people on different days. Now, she may have been half joking about that. It's hard to tell just from reading someone, but I do believe she was half not joking, because I know that's a very typical thing for INFJs to feel that they have a kind of shaky sense of self sometimes, that they feel very malleable and very, that they are different things to different people, and that sometimes they don't know, even I've read this all over the boards too, sometimes they feel like they don't even know how they're very aware of how other people are feeling. INFJs are superb at that. They're very aware very quickly of what's really, really going on the emotional level with the people around them. But they may not be anywhere near as adept at knowing how they feel about those people. They need to maybe go away and really think about that in order to know their own minds as regards that. That's a typical INFJ. Again, if you can't easily relate to what I'm saying here, I think you should really consider seriously that you very well may not be an INFJ. The third quote I have here is from another INFJ commentator, someone who's very certain of his type, but who also says that he feels that perhaps his auxiliary FE is a bit stronger in his case than it is for most INFJs. But he says, I feel most like myself when I'm helping other people and when I know everyone around me is happy. So again, if you're someone who's an IN type who's been considering INFJ, and you hear things like that, and you hear about how socially smooth and easy to get along, and easy, people just know how to sort things out in a group, and a very, like what I call with INFJs, the subtle, benevolent psychological shepherding of others. I feel that INFJs are the masters of that. I think that fits with everything I've learned about that type. If you do not easily and quickly go identify with those qualities and those kinds of behaviors, those sorts of behaviors, perhaps you should really demote INFJ as a big option and look into some other ones more closely. Okay, so now let's take a look at the yeah buts for the other types. Okay, so for example, there's one other IN type of the four that has FE in the conscious part of their cognitive function stack. That is INTP. So what does FE look like when it's in the inferior position in that type's cognitive function stack? What I have seen, and again, INTPs out there who know they're INTPs, I would love your feedback on this. Please tell me if you have something to add or something to refute or something to confirm here. But What this means, I think, is that, yes, the FE, as is the case for all the types, under tremendous stress, that's a circumstance in which one's inferior function is likely to kind of surge forth and, grab the wheel of the metaphorical car, for the cognitive function stack. And or during in an unusual circumstance for them. So another one is when set of INTPs, and I have had INTPs, all my boyfriends have been INTPs. My dad's an INTP, my brother's an INTP. Many of my friends over decades have been INTPs. They're just INTPs all over the place for me. And it's said of them that when they fall in love, they go all the, it's all or nothing with them. And when they do fall in love, it's this overwhelming experience that they just basically surf on. Like they just enjoy it. It's almost kind of childlike in its manifestation. They get very giddy. They get very unlike the present, at least in private. There are a lot of exceptions all of a sudden to the usual kind of stony-faced exterior that an INTP will present the world with. And so those are some examples of what FE looks like and how it can manifest in that type. But and here's the other thing. I certainly have seen INTPs. My brother's coming to mind right now, especially. But also my dad can do this too. I certainly have seen evidence of INTPs being quite gracious and quite able to operate the machinery of polite society, shall we say. They can be pretty smooth, many of them, when they want to be. But here's what makes them very, very different. I still think are radically differentiated from INFJ's expression of FE. INTPs, usually I believe what the motivation is behind their exercise of FE when they are doing FE. When they're doing FE, the kind of motivation there is a much more kind of avoidant or passive one than that's how I would characterize it versus an INFJ's exercise of FE. In that, if they're doing that, they're going through the motions, and perhaps with a level of sincerity, I don't know. But they're being smooth and they're shaking hands and they're nodding in the right places But I find that INTPs, when they're exercising FE, it's more about keeping their mouths shut. It's more about them declining from saying something really argumentative, even though they really don't agree with someone, or they're having a conversation, say a group conversation with someone who they think is being a total idiot. But usually the motivation for INTPs, the natural motive, a more natural motivation for them to exercise FE in this way by just kind of eluding, just avoiding a scene. It's not because they have such a tremendous drive to contribute constantly to social harmony. It's because the way their minds work is like, what's going to work best here? And I don't want to deal with a confrontation. That's going to drain me and be boring and awful. And I just don't need it. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and just, kind of get out of commenting on this thing right now, or literally get out of the situation, leave physically so I don't have to deal with it anymore. That's very different from, again, I as I was doing that, I'm doing it now. If I'm thinking about the legion INTPs I know, and how, if I was asking them, do you relate to those phrases, those quotes from real, INFJs that I just put there? Can you relate to that? It's a huge, INTPs it's a huge and pretty much ongoing priority for me that I'm just aching to make sure that everybody's happy. And even if that means that the thing that, some things that are really important to me, like say the truth as I see it, as I have worked, a billion hours on sorting out for myself with my massive TI in the dominant position. But you know what? I don't want to upset anyone. So that would be a terrible, terrible thing to upset anyone. So I'm just going to put that truth away, and I'm going to really put effort into like going out there and making sure that so and so has their tea, and making sure that this person doesn't feel slighted, and worrying, and like just being a kind of master of um, social ceremony. I think like when you put, I don't know, I don't think INTPs should be able to relate to that very strongly. That idea of just being super suave all the time and just always knowing what to do and always knowing what to. Oh, and this is the thing. This is about what FE. FE is not, again, it's the cognitive function. It's not necessarily about what you do, or it's not. It shouldn't be the greatest importance should not be placed on, for the purpose of categorization, on what you do. But if you have prominent FE, then you are definitely going to have a rather, again, unless they're really strange, exceptional mitigating circumstances, you are going to have an uncommon grasp. It will be a really quick study at what makes people feel good, what promotes harmony in the situation, what makes everything just goes very smoothly, and there's no, to minimize controversy, to minimize upset, to minimize the chance of hackles being raised by careless comment, to just be smooth. People with FE and prominence know how to do that. If nothing else, it's really seriously interfered with the natural development of expression of that cognitive function for them. All right, moving along. Now, the other two types, the other two IN types, the INFP and the INTJ, they don't have FE anywhere in the conscious part of their cognitive function stacks. Let's deal with INFP, because that's, I think, should be quite easy. Now, again, there's certain things that INFP and INFJ have in common. Those two types are known to be, they're both NFs. They're both idealists in Kiersey's scheme. They're both known to be fairly emotionally sensitive. INFP is known to be very emotionally sensitive and very, very deeply feeling. INFP, very deeply feeling. And both those types are kind of known to be, or reputed to be, the master empaths of the 16 types. But here are two big differences with that. I can get into this another, somewhere else, but I would say, though, that the empathy that INFJ, the masterful kind of empathy that INFJ is able to produce is what I would call like observational empathy, meaning they are able to very accurately perceive and also in a strange sort of way, I can't relate to it because I'm not like this, but are able to feel the feelings of other people. But it's almost as if the way they are feeling those feelings is as if at a great remove, like they're seeing emotional data that is very intricate, and they're seeing it with a kind of cold eye. But they're seeing it in all of its detail and very accurately and very clearly and impersonally, even seeing that emotional data. INFP's empathy, on the other hand, is what I would call immersive. It is a virtual reality performance of another's what is imagined to be another's emotional state. And what the INFP is drawing on is their very, very in-depth, extensive, lifelong examination, deep examination of their own emotional life, which kind of forms a huge database of information for them to draw on, to introject, to use their big imaginations and the material of this database, if you like, this emotional knowledge database, you might say, to recreate inside themselves the emotion accurately, the emotions that other people are having. INFP is ruled by FI, which is an entirely different. It's just and again, I've done a lot on that. So, and other people have done a better job of describing. I would say, what introverted feeling is all about. But here's one thing for sure. If you have introverted feeling in prominence as an ENFP does or an INFP does, with INFP it's in the dominant position, with ENFP it's in the auxiliary position. When I read phrases like that of like, oh, I just seem to be a different, sometimes I wonder if I'm a different, I'm a different person. I'm a social chameleon. I very naturally want and do quite often just kind of seamlessly blend with the harmonious social situation that I'm in. And I just know what to do and want to put effort into maintaining that harmony. And that very often is the highest priority for me in terms of what I put out there socially. An heavy FI user, we cannot relate to that. We are not as good at that, most of us. Of course, there are exceptions. Practice, 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 right? But and also having heavy duty, unusually heavy external inducements to go against our grain, might cause us to be just as suave as most INFJs are. But most of us really are not, and we have a lot of, although we too are very motivated by pleasing people, we don't want to displease other people. We get a huge bang. We find it very motivating to please people. But we have a lot of internal obstacles to, there are a lot of things on a checklist that need to be cleared before we can always proceed with that. It's not easy for a heavy FI user to identify with this placing above all other priorities, at least for short periods of time, perhaps, social harmony and everybody feeling nice. Like we can't relate to that. So if you are an IN who has FI, really think about that and how much you relate. If you are on the fence, like think about how closely you relate to what I was talking about and describing for FE, typical drives and concerns, and often enough skills that go with that. If you don't identify with that of being like, oh, I find nothing, like if you can't say of yourself, I find few things as easy and natural as making small talk with people that's interesting and pleasant and that's pretty much guaranteed not to ruffle any feathers and it's going to be timely and never, very rarely awkward. If you can't relate to that and nod your head like, oh yeah, that's me, then you are probably not an INFJ. Whatever else you may see that you have in common with what's described as that type. All right, next. So the last one is INTJ. Again, INTJ doesn't have any FE in the conscious part of their cognitive function stack. They have FI and they have it in the tertiary position, which is pretty low down there. However, the FI does definitely show itself in INTJs and typical INTJs in that INTJs usually like the heavy FI users. They have a strong sense of self and a strong sense of self that's quite anchored and that is quite impervious to, relatively speaking, to the influences of the outside world. And they tend to know not just what they think, but they know who they are. They've got a strong sense of that that's rather fixed compared to people who have FE high in the cognitive function stack. So that should be if you identify more with that, even though you're using NI and they're INFJ and INTJ are using the same dominant cognitive function, so they do have a lot in common mentally. And also they can look very much alike, and their approach to living daily life can look very much alike. As I mentioned in the video, quite often the way they dress can be quite alike. In certain cases, lots of exceptions, granted. But yeah, I mean, but the thing, I'll give you the example from the person that I recently shared my home with, who felt herself to be INFJ. So she really was exhibiting several cues that strongly indicated to me that, oh yeah, she probably, I could see why she would, where she would have preference for introversion, preference for creative thinking, intuition, and also to a sort of judging approach to living day-to-day life. That was all there. However, the parts that I found to be not at all INFJ is that this person was very blunt with me. Was very, very straight ahead, multiple times in 10 minutes, okay, with saying, I want this. It was very clear, like this person was like, I want this. I'm making no bones about saying it. I'm like, I know what I'm into, and that's a priority, and I'm looking for it, and I'm being very frank about that. Now, not to say that INFJs can't be blunt. Yes, they can. In fact, I'm going to do something on this actually, but sometimes they can be very blunt. But the key word there is sometimes. Usually, when an INFJ is being really blunt, it's it's because of one of two main things. Either they are at the absolute end of their rope, they're stressed or exhausted beyond belief, and therefore they are not themselves, and so they just blurt out something that might really offend someone or hurt their feelings, but they just don't care in that moment, which is uncharacteristic for them. Or it would more to the point, what's uncharacteristic is the possibility that hurt feelings caused by what they say will cause disharmony in the group. That's the big, big, big concern. Or also with the group they're a part of. It could be in a dyad too. The other big reason that an INFJ might occasionally be very blunt is when they feel that it is. Usually they'll wait a while before they, if they're sort of more mature, older, usually older, mature INFJs, then they're going to have really honed their skills, their social skills, and really gotten good at them. And so they will usually hold back a while before they kind of let somebody have it, and just go bang with something really blunt that's going to upset the other person. But occasionally they will do that. Usually that's a sign, when they do that, that's a real sign that INFJ really loves you, really cares about you, because it's very uncomfortable for them. It goes against their grain to say something that they know is going to cause a lot of unpleasantness in the moment because of the other person's unhappiness. So when they do that, it's because they feel it's another big reason is when they feel it's very important that you hear that opinion from them, that you hear the the straight dope from them about something that they've been observing in you, usually for a while. It's not the first. That's not their first inclination, is to go wham with like whatever they really think unvarnished. That is the MO, however, for INTJ. As my comments, like the comments on my walls will attest. When someone's going to go be like, this sucks, basically, or like, this is stupid, or this is whatever, like some one line, just like, bleh, criticism of something, almost always there's a little INTJ next to it, next to it on my walls anyway. Yeah. So another feature of INTJs that's totally counter to, that I saw too in this one person I'm thinking of, is there was a situation where I, for various reasons, was kind of just maxed out socially, and I was quite exhausted, and I was quite preoccupied. I had a lot of things on my mind, and this person really wanted to talk to me and get into things with me, and was kind of like coming for me in a social way. And I was sending very clear body language signals that say, don't talk to me. Like, I don't want to get into a thing right now. I don't want to talk much. For example, when the person would come to approach me, I did not turn my body to face her, to talk to her. And I was aware of doing this or not doing this at the time. I also limited eye contact. I also kept my answers much shorter than I usually do. All of those are pretty clear. If you know body language and you're socially adept and you're tuned in to social stuff, then and behaviors and comportment, then you're going to recognize that somebody who's exhibiting those behaviors is not really into talking right now, or at least you could guess that. Now, here's the thing: an INFJ, I believe, absolutely would read those signals very clearly, probably more clearly than just about a member of just about any other type. Pretty much every time they would encounter it, they would correctly read those signals, know exactly what they mean, and they also would have other sort of perceptual data about, a person near them, uh, near to them, a person's emotional tone, shall we say, on the inside of themselves, and would act accordingly. Would really would wherever possible would opt for the choice of approach or action that would be the most likely to promote the greatest amount of harmony and good feeling in the room, with everybody involved. Um, they would not be they would not be just sort of running over those cues and ignoring them or not seeing them. But this person who thought herself to be an INFJ was doing that. And there are several other things too. But that's what made me think, like, okay, this is not this can't be an INFJ. So that's a lot of that's a lot of descriptive material. If anybody has any other comments or anecdotes or anything about that, I would love to hear them. Please do write in the comments and tell me what you think of that. This idea of Fe as being a very distinct differentiator for INFJ. Thanks for watching.